When you try to imagine, like the ultimate sound of America, your mind probably goes straight to something incredibly specific, right? You picture these sweeping, wide-open Western landscapes.
Oh, absolutely. You think of that rugged pioneer spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a solitary cowboy silhouetted against a massive sunset, and you hear those wide, booming, majestic chords of something like the fanfare for the common man.
Right. It just feels almost genetic. When you hear it, it feels entirely inevitable.
Yeah.
As if that music simply, grew right out of the American soil.
It feels like it was written by someone who practically lived in the saddle, staring out over the prairie. But here's the massive contradiction.
It really is massive.
Yeah. The man who actually invented that iconic, wide-open American sound, he wasn't a cowboy. He was a gay, agnostic, Jewish kid from a family of Lithuanian immigrants.
Which is just wild to wrap your head around.
Totally wild. He grew up living above a Brooklyn department store, and he actually discovered the artistic power of American jazz while, of all things, hanging out in Paris.
Right. Thousands of miles away from home.
Yeah. And then later in his life, the very government he wrote all that patriotic music for actually investigated him for being un-American.
It's a stunning paradox, really. I mean, the very person who engineered America's musical identity was someone who, on paper at least, existed almost entirely on the margins of the traditional American establishment.
And that's exactly what we're digging into on today's deep dive. We've pulled together historical records, biographies, and musical analyses to figure out how this kid from Brooklyn consciously built a national identity out of, well, completely unexpected parts.
It's such a fascinating story.
It really is. So for you listening, we are looking past those famous melodies to understand the actual human being behind them, the guy they call the Dean of American music.
It's a compelling journey because to understand how he constructed that American sound, you have to look at his roots. And those roots were entirely detached from the classical music establishment of the time.
So let's start right there. In Brooklyn, he was born in 1900. And even his name has this sort of built-in mythology to it. His family name was originally Kaplan.
Right, Kaplan. Yeah, and his father, Harris, spent some time working in Scotland to save up for the boat fare to America, and the name somehow got anglicized to Copland. Which is so interesting because for a long time, he actually thought the name change happened at Ellis Island.
Oh, like the quintessential American immigrant story.
Exactly. And he didn't even know his surname had originally been Kaplan until much, much later in his life. I think it really sets the stage for a life built on adaptation,
Yeah, definitely. So he grew up at 628 Washington Avenue in Brooklyn, living right over his parents' shop. He described it as a kind of neighborhood Macy's.
Right, and all the kids worked in the store. There was absolutely no grand musical pedigree in this family. His father had zero interest in music.
But his mother sang and played piano, right? And his older sister, Lorene, was really his earliest musical champion.
She was. She gave him his first piano lessons, and she would bring home opera librettos for him to study.
But the real turning point, the moment a 15-year-old kid decides, I am going to be a composer, that happened after he saw the legendary Polish pianist Ignacy Jan Paderewski play.
Yeah, that performance just lit the fuse for him. He decided he needed formal training, so he started studying with a pretty noted teacher named Reuben Goldmark.
Okay, Goldmark.
Right, and Goldmark gave him a highly disciplined, very Germanic foundation in music theory. He later credited Goldmark with basically saving him from floundering, giving him the technical tools to actually construct a piece of music.
But there was a massive catch with Goldmark, wasn't there?
Oh, huge catch. Goldmark was intensely conservative.
Right. The biographies note that his list of approved composers pretty much ended with Richard Strauss. Anything newer than that was strictly forbidden.
Forbidden entirely. So he is playing this double game as a student.
Oh, I love this part.
He's writing these standard romantic graduation pieces to appease his teacher, but secretly, in his own time, he's experimenting with much more daring, modern sounds on the side.
And that friction is really what pushed him across the Atlantic, right? By the 1920s, he realized that if he wanted to find his own voice, he just couldn't stay in Goldmark's shadow.
No, he had to get out. He had to go to Paris.
Because Paris was the undisputed center of the artistic universe at the time. So he enrolls in a summer school program for Americans at Fontainebleau. But he hits a wall there too, right?
It does, yeah. He found his initial teachers there to be just as traditional and stifling as Goldmark.
Which leads him to make a pivot that basically changes his life, and frankly changes all of American music. He switches to study with Nadia Boulanger.
Yes. Nadia Boulanger.
And what's so interesting to me is how hesitant he was at first. He wrote in letters that, no one had ever thought of studying composition with a woman before.
Which just shows you the mindset of the era.
Yeah.
But she ends up being his absolute greatest mentor.
Based on everything we've looked at for this deep dive, I picture Nadia Boulanger as this kind of musical Yoda.
That is highly accurate, actually.
Yeah.
She had this razor-sharp critical mind. But she didn't just point at a measure and say, well, this is wrong.
Right.
She would actually deconstruct his work and show him the structural mechanics of why it was weak.
So she wasn't just fixing his grammar, so to speak. She was teaching him how to tell a story. There's this French concept she drilled into him, la grande ligne, the long line.
Yes, la grande ligne. It is the sense of forward motion in a piece of music.
Okay, forward motion.
Right. It's the feeling of inevitability, making sure that a piece functions as a living, breathing entity from the very first note to the last, rather than just being a collection of pretty moments.
So it's sort of like a good suspense novel. Like, even if a specific chapter is quiet or slow, you still feel the underlying pull toward the climax. He basically learned how to give music a plot.
Exactly. And what made Boulanger so vital for him was that she combined that really rigorous structural discipline with wildly eclectic tastes.
Which he definitely didn't get from Goldmark.
Not at all. She analyzed Bach with the exact same intensity she analyzed Igor Stravinsky. Her openness just stripped away his prejudices and gave him the confidence to experiment.
And we really can't ignore the environment outside the classroom either. I mean, imagine being a young American kid in 1920s Paris.
Oh, it must have been incredible.
Right. He's hanging out at the famous Shakespeare and Company bookstore. He's breathing the exact same air as expats like Hemingway, Ezra Pound, Picasso.
It was a wildly creative time.
And it is in this incredibly heady European expatriate atmosphere that he hears American jazz, but with completely fresh ears.
Yeah, it's a classic case of needing physical and cultural distance to see your own home clearly. I mean, he had heard jazz back in America, of course.
Right, he had even played in some dance bands, from what I read.
Exactly. But surrounded by the European avant-garde, he suddenly recognized its immense architectural potential. He saw that the rhythmic vitality of jazz could actually be the foundational building block for a distinctly American classical music.
Because European composers were already doing that, right? Taking their local folk tunes and turning them into symphonies. So he looks at jazz and thinks, well, that's our folk music.
Precisely. So he returns to the United States in the late 1920s, totally fired up. He starts writing this very complex, dissonant, jazz-influenced avant-garde music. He's really trying to establish himself as a serious modernist.
But then the timeline catches up with him. The stock market crashes.
The Great Depression hits.
Yeah, and this forces a massive existential shift for him.
The cultural landscape of America shifted violently. I mean, millions were out of work. Breadlines were everywhere.
It was a really bleak time.
It was. And for him, sitting in a room writing highly abstract, difficult music for a tiny, elite audience suddenly felt completely out of touch. It felt socially irresponsible, honestly.
So he connects with the circle around the photographer Alfred Stieglitz, who pushed this artistic motto, Affirm America. And he also adopts this German concept called Gebrauchsmusik.
Right, Gebrauchsmusik. It translates roughly to music for use.
Music for use. I like that.
It's this philosophy that music shouldn't just exist in an ivory tower for the initiated. It should serve a utilitarian purpose. It should be accessible for students to play, and it should reach the wider public through new mediums like radio, theater, and film.
I hear that, but let me play devil's advocate for just a second here. When you look at his career trajectory during this time, he goes from writing avant-garde Paris pieces to literally writing the soundtrack for the movie of Mice and Men in Hollywood.
Yeah, he did.
And he writes an opera for high school kids. He goes to Mexico, hears some tunes in a dance hall, and turns that into El Salon, Mexico.
Yeah.
Then he writes Billy the Kid using actual literal cowboy songs.
Right.
So how is that not just chasing a paycheck? I mean, how is that not just selling out?
It's a totally fair question. And honestly, his own friends threw that exact accusation at him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The composer David Diamond actually begged him in a letter not to sell out entirely to the mongrel commercialists.
Yeah, mongrel commercialists, that's harsh.
Very harsh. But the thing is, it wasn't selling out because he didn't dumb down the music. That is a really crucial distinction here. What he did was actually incredibly sophisticated.
Okay, so break that down for me. If he's just taking a simple cowboy song, How is it sophisticated?
Well, he took those simple, familiar melodies, but he framed them using highly complex modernist mechanics. He didn't just orchestrate a cowboy song with basic strumming chords. He put those tunes into a modernist wind tunnel. For example, he used polyrhythms.
Meaning what exactly? Just for those of us not deep into music theory.
Sure, meaning multiple conflicting rhythms happening at the exact same time. So imagine the percussion section playing in a waltz time, a strict 1-2-3.
Okay, 1-2-3.
While at the same time, the string section is playing a rigid march in 4/4 time.
Oh, wow, that sounds chaotic.
It creates this restless, wide-open tension that literally mimics the off-kilter galloping of a horse. He kept the folk melody intact, but he stripped away the cozy, traditional European harmonies. He left these vast, empty acoustic spaces between the high notes and the low notes, and that's what tricks your brain into picturing a wide-open prairie.
Oh, that makes total sense. He was doing for American music what his hero, Igor Stravinsky, had done for Russian music.
Exactly.
Stravinsky took old Russian pagan rituals and blew them up with modern orchestration. And he took the DNA of American folk music, things like Shaker hymns, like Simple Gifts in Appalachian Spring, and used those advanced architectural tools to build something entirely new.
And he defended this pivot beautifully, by the way. He argued that a composer who is terrified of losing their artistic integrity just by coming into contact with a mass audience has completely lost the meaning of the word art.
Wow, that's a great quote.
It is.
Wow.
He viewed it as his civic responsibility to respond to the suffering of the Depression and to speak to his fellow citizens, not at them.
Which brings us to a transition that is honestly staggering. He had spent a decade desperately trying to write music for the common man. He wrote the ultimate patriotic soundtracks, Fanfare for the Common Man, A Lincoln Portrait. But it was precisely that deep empathy for the working class that suddenly put a massive target on his back when the geopolitical winds changed.
Right. We enter the 1950s, the Cold War, and the Red Scare. When you look at the historical records from this era, the paranoia is just overwhelming.
Oh, for sure.
During the 1930s, he, like many artists who were deeply moved by the Depression, had ties to the Popular Front. He supported left-wing and progressive politicians.
Which, we should note, was incredibly common for intellectuals at the time.
Absolutely common. But in the McCarthy era, those past associations were fully weaponized against him. He was placed on an FBI list of artists suspected of communist affiliations. He was officially blacklisted.
And the irony here is just thick. I mean, a Lincoln Portrait, a piece of music literally honoring Abraham Lincoln, using Lincoln's own words, was pulled from President Eisenhower's 1953 inaugural concert.
All because he was deemed a threat to the nation.
Right. He is called down to Washington to sit across from Joseph McCarthy and Roy Cohn for an interrogation. And keeping in mind the historical reality of the era, the stakes were incredibly high.
The transcripts of that hearing are fascinating to read. They grilled him about his travels and his associations, entirely ignoring the fact that his life's work had celebrated American values globally.
But what really stands out is his absolute refusal to cower.
He didn't just apologize and retreat. Not at all. He fiercely defended artistic freedom.
Yeah, he really held his ground.
He argued that the dread and suspicion of the Cold War were toxic to the creative spirit of the country. And he coined a phrase that remains profoundly relevant today. He asserted that a free society must protect the immemorial right of the artist to be wrong.
The immemorial right of the artist to be wrong, that is so powerful. You have to have the freedom to explore ideas, even unpopular ones, without the government threatening your livelihood.
Exactly.
And what's wild is that while the government was squeezing him for being too radical, the artistic elite was squeezing him for being too commercial.
Yes, there was a severe aesthetic backlash happening simultaneously. After World War II, a new generation of intellectuals and composers looked at his populist ballets from the 30s and 40s and just dismissed them as hopelessly middlebrow.
Hopelessly middlebrow, wow.
The trend had swung back to hyper-complexity. They basically equated his popularity with a lack of intellectual rigor.
Talk about being squeezed from both sides. The politicians think you're a subversive threat, and the art critics think you're a commercial hack. I feel like a lot of artists would have just quit right there.
But he reinvents himself one last time. He absolutely refused to become a museum piece.
Yeah.
So in the 1950s, he starts exploring the 12-tone serial technique, which had been developed by Arnold Schoenberg.
Okay, I have to admit, whenever I hear 12-tone serialism, my brain immediately jumps to chaotic, unlistenable math music. What exactly is the mechanism there?
It's a very common reaction, and honestly, the mechanism is highly mathematical. Traditional music is built around a home key, a tonal center that your ear naturally wants to resolve to.
Right, like a musical home base.
Exactly. Well, serialism actively destroys that home key. The rule is that you must arrange all 12 notes of the chromatic scale into a specific sequence, or row. And you cannot repeat a note until you've played all the other 11.
So it forces every single note to be equal, which means your ear never gets to rest on a comfortable, familiar chord.
Exactly. Strict European serialists used it to create music that sounded completely alien to traditional harmony. He initially resisted it, thinking it sacrificed a composer's individuality. But then he realized it was just a tool. It was just, as he put it, an angle of vision.
So did he cheat? Like, did he bend the rule?
Oh, he absolutely bent the rules. He figured out how to use the strict mathematical row to his advantage. He would arrange his 12 notes in such a way that if you grouped certain notes together, they sneakily formed familiar tonal chords within that rigid system.
Oh, that is brilliant. So he's playing by their mathematical rules, but rigging the game so it still sounds like him.
Exactly. He used the method to enliven his musical thinking, but he kept his distinct, wide-open American voice. You can hear this in later works, like his Piano Fantasy and Escape.
And the physical way he composed this music is just as mind-bending. You read accounts of his process, and it wasn't linear at all.
No, not at all.
He didn't sit down with a blank page and write from measure 1 to the finale. He would sit at the piano, improvising, and collect these little fragments he called gold nuggets.
Right. Then he would assemble them entirely out of order. He treated music almost like a visual artist making a collage.
A collage, yeah.
He famously said, "I don't compose, I assemble materials." It requires a tremendous architectural mind to compose that way,
I can imagine.
to hold all those disparate nuggets in your head and figure out how they eventually lock together to form that grand ligne Nadia Boulanger taught him.
But eventually the assembly process stops. As we get into the 1960s, the new compositions just cease. And he described it without a lot of drama, which is interesting. He just said, it was exactly as if someone had simply turned off a faucet.
Which highlights a profound psychological resilience, I think.
Right.
For many creators, losing their primary outlet for expression is utterly devastating. They become bitter, or they retreat from the world entirely.
Right.
But he did the exact opposite. When his own composition faucet turned off, he channeled all of his remaining energy into championing other composers.
He really leaned fully into being the dean of American music. He pivoted to conducting, traveling the world to promote American music, and more importantly, he became an incredibly generous mentor.
He did.
But he had a strict rule, right? He didn't want his students to sound like him. He didn't want a bunch of little coplands writing knockoff cowboy ballets.
Exactly. He pushed them to find their own unique voices, passing down the exact same gift Nadia Boulanger had given him back in Paris.
That's a beautiful full circle moment.
It is. And he maintained that same quiet dignity and loyalty in his personal life, too. He guarded his privacy fiercely, which, was a survival mechanism for a gay man in that era, but he didn't hide either.
Right. The biographies point out that he lived openly with younger male partners, the most notable being the photographer Victor Kraft. And that relationship was incredibly enduring.
It really was.
Kraft's behavior could reportedly be quite erratic and stressful over the years, but he remained a constant, grounding source of support for him. He even provided financial security for Kraft's child later in life. It just speaks to this incredibly deep well of loyalty he had.
He was a man who contained multitudes, truly. He experienced the highest of highs, literally defining a nation's culture, and the sting of being ostracized by that same nation. Yet he synthesized all of that experience into his art and his teaching.
So why does all of this matter to you, listening to this deep dive today? I think his story resonates so strongly because it challenges our assumptions about what a national identity actually is.
Yes, absolutely.
He built a unified American sound, not by isolating himself in some purist, exclusionary ivory tower. He did it by enthusiastically embracing the messy, beautiful diversity of the world around him.
He took elements that seemed entirely disconnected. Parisian jazz, strict European music theory, Mexican dancehall tunes, shaker hymns, cowboy ballads.
It's a wild mix.
A completely wild mix, and he fused them together. He proved that an identity isn't a monolith, it's a mosaic.
His music wasn't just a soundtrack for a specific era, it was a mirror reflecting America back to itself, showing us that we are at our best when we synthesize our different parts. Which leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to mull over today.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What is it?
Think back to that classic sound of America we started with, those wide open chords. Now, imagine if you were a young composer today.
Okay.
He's looking around at our hyper-connected, fragmented, incredibly noisy digital world. What gold nuggets would he be collecting right now?
Oh, well.
Out of all the chaos and digital noise of our modern lives, what would the American sound like if it were being invented today?
That is a fantastic question to leave on.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of the sources. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.